Welcome back to More Sewing with Michele. This week, it's all about the clamshell. Now, the clamshell is a quilt. You can see that I made a clamshell quilt in back of me, but it is a vintage or a classic design for quilting. Now, it has no straight lines. So it's one of those ones that have traditionally been for more advanced quilting because the difficulty level is a little bit higher because of the concave and convex shapes to the actual clamshell. Now, I have a piece cut out here. This is what the clamshell looks like before it's pieced together. But wait, I've got a great technique, and it's all about AccuQuilt. So I've got the AccuQuilt clamshell die, and that's what I used to create that quilt. And that's what I'm going to show you today, how to use this die to make wonderful clamshell shapes and to make a quilt, a table runner. It could be whatever you want. Can't wait to show you. Let's get going on this week's More Sewing with Michele. Okay, so I've got so much to talk about today. So the clamshell pattern, which is a vintage or a classic quilt that you can make, it originally was done more so with English paper piecing or with needle turn hand sewing. And that makes it really easy for those convex and concave areas of the pattern or the shape of the actual clamshell here. So when you have this area here, it's just really hard to sew it. So it makes it easier if you're doing it by hand. But I've got some tips and tricks to show you a little bit later. Now, basically, the way that the AccuQuilt system has come about, they have these mark up lines or alignment notches, as I like to call them. And I'm going to show you on the close-up video here. You'll see that right here, they have these alignment notches. Now, those notches, oh my gosh, do they make it easy. They make aligning everything perfect. Now, if you go back to English paper piecing or even when you did hand sewing, they also had to use some sort of alignment areas. Sometimes they would use a pencil and make those registration marks or places that they needed to line up so that everything is laid out and comes together perfectly. Now, if you don't have those marks, sometimes because of it's on a curved and depending upon the fabric, your fabrics can stretch out of shape. And oftentimes, if you would get to the end, you would notice, uh-oh, I've got more clam on my left side than I do of the other piece. So those notches are perfect. And what I like to do is secure those notches, make sure that the notches line up, and then go ahead and do my sewing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to get to that in a little bit. I want to talk about the AccuQuilt part of it. So this AccuQuilt cutting system is going to save you time, fatigue on your hands from doing the rotary cutting. It is just wonderful. And I love my machine. Now, this is the Go Big. We do have this one that we'll put on the landing page also, so if you wanted to purchase one. But there also is a hand crank. Now, this die that we have, the clamshell, this is an 8-inch. So it is the biggest clamshell that we have for the AccuQuilt system. And you will notice it is perfectly fine to fit into this size. Now, the Go Big will accommodate all the different dies that AccuQuilt makes, which is why I love my machine, because depending upon whatever die I buy, it will handle it just fine. Now, I want to talk a little bit first about the die. So let me show you here. You'll see that there's two different colors of the foam, and in between there is the blade. And I can push down here, and I can feel the blade, but it's not going to hurt you. It's protected between the foam, and that's perfect because with that blade being protected between the foam, not only is it going to continue to cut straight, but it also protects from any damage that you can do as far as getting it out of alignment. So I love that about it. Now, the gray, the two different colors of grays also serve a purpose to where you know how to line up your fabric on this particular die. Now, this die, on most of the times, I would say with my AccuQuilt, I don't think it's super important what direction your fabric is laying. But because we are working with curved elements on the die here, I like to make sure that my fabric is laying perfectly in alignment with the grain of the fabric. So basically, I'm going to look at my fabric, I'm going to look at the grain and see which ways it's flowing, and then I'm going to lay that so that that is like across the actual die. And that way, that when you actually have everything cut, it will stretch accordingly and you won't have any problems with it. So if you actually, sometimes I have scrap fabrics and I will just lay it down on my die, cut away. It's not going to be super problematic if it's not with the straight of the grain of the fabric, but it could stretch out a little bit more. So rather than having something that's problematic, especially for a quilt pattern that is a little bit higher in difficulty, this is just going to alleviate one more problem that could arise. So once again, for this particular die, and because I am sewing a curved element, I'm going to make sure that that fabric is aligned with the grain, straight up and down. So let me get that out of my system. Now, another great thing about this die, the clamshell, and this is the 8-inch clamshell, is on it actually comes with a free pattern. And I'm going to go ahead and show it up at the close-up. So it's got a pattern here. It's called Beachcomber. Beachcombing? Yes. Beachcombing quilt. So with it, you're going to get the pattern all ready to make a quilt. And I love that. And then on top of that, it's not, if you look real close, this pattern isn't a typical clamshell. So if you look at the quilt in back of me, you can see that that is a typical clamshell. This one's a little bit different. And a little bit later, I'm going to show you different ways that you can lay out your clamshells to get very striking and different looking blocks or quilt patterns, we'll call. So, got that said, the consumables on any cutting for die cutting is you're going to need to have your mat. So make sure that you have a mat that is the same size as your die. That's super important when you're doing any sort of die cutting with your AccuQuilt. Because if you only have a mat that goes one way, obviously you're not going to get the pressure and it's not going to become a complete cut. So that is the one thing that you're going to want to double check anytime you get a die for your AccuQuilt, is that you have a mat that works with it. And like I said, these are consumables. You will see, if I hold this up real close, you will see that I've been cutting and you can see the lines for the dies that I've used with this particular mat here. I'm going to show you real quick how easy it is to cut fabric. So like I said before, I'm going to put this one down, lay it flat. I'm going to add my mat on top. And then the beauty of this particular Go Big is all I have to do is line it up hands-free, and this machine is going to pull that die through, do the magic, and the cutting for me. Don't forget, you can go to moors-sew.com or click on the link in the description so you can pick up your AccuQuilt 8-inch clamshell die, as well as an AccuQuilt cutting system, and also pick up any mats and other accessories you need from today's More Sewing with Michele episode. So I want to talk a little bit about the actual clamshell shape. And taking this one shape of a clamshell, we're going to lay it down on the table here. And then just randomly, which is how I made the quilt in back of me, I'm going to add additional pieces and lay them out. So you can kind of see how the clamshell comes together. You put that one there, and so on and so forth. So this is what I mean by there's no straight lines. every line that you sew together for this is going to be a curve. But I have a really cool technique to show you how, or it's almost like you're sewing a straight line. So that's basically a traditional clamshell layout. Now I want to show you there's different things that you can do. Now I've seen multiple um, um, variations to the clamshell just by using solid fabrics. You can maybe have one row of a solid white fabric, the next row have multiple layers of and fabrics and patterns of a clamshell, and then go back to a solid. So it's kind of like a striped clamshell. You can vary it. There's so many things that you can do with the clamshell, which I love. Now I want to show you a different pattern or design. So this is one of the clamshells there, and it's a yellow. And let me grab another one here. So if I lay them together like this, sew them together, just the little tips there, and then I can add different elements this way. And this is going to give a completely different look to your clamshell. Look at that. Look at the way that it looks. So imagine if you had different themes, if you only had these two fabrics, if you had multiple fabrics, it just goes on and on from there. And that's one of the things that I love about quilting. You can take a traditional pattern, you can use your own fabrics, your own design as far as where you place those fabrics, and get a totally different looking finished product than the original. And that's the beauty of quilting. So that is my little tutorial, so to speak, about laying out these wonderful clamshell shapes. Let me go real quick. I'm going to talk about, once again, this is the paperwork that comes with the clamshell, but I want to show you some of the pictures they have. And I'm going to go to the close-up here. You can see where this is just random here. This one, they used a lot of white with just a few random, but look, it's in a chevron pattern. And then this one here is the same layout that I just did. So lots of different things that you can do with the layout and the design of your clamshells to make a completely cool quilt. Now I want to talk a little bit about numbers. So the clamshell on back of me, that one I used 148 individual clamshells. Now a baby quilt would be about 77. A throw is about 197, and then a king size would be 393 clamshells. That, you should have a clam bake to go along with it. So they're so much fun, and I'm going to show you next how to sew them together. Okay, now let's get to the fun part. We've cut all our clamshells. We've got a whole pile to work with, and I went ahead and I started. This will be just like a baby size quilt, but I went ahead and started some of the different rows for you. I'm going to show you how to piece it together. So one of the things that I have decided, which makes it easier for me, is I always start in one area and work from there. So I'm going to add this one here, and you can see that I have kind of like the columns, a dome shape here, and I will add it. But when I piece it together, I'm going to turn it upside down and work this way. And that way, when I piece these things together, everything will line up and it'll all make sense. It totally seems backwards the first time you put these together. Once you get the technique down, it's going to be a breeze. And the great thing about it is that, like I said, these clamshells, they have these alignment marks on them, and it makes it so anyone can do this. You just got to take your time, make sure everything, those marks line up on both sides, and you're good to go. So let's get going. So I want to show you how I align these up. Let me put this down. So you can see that there's all these alignment notches on there. And basically, let me release that. You're going to line them up with the pieces that you're sewing together. So the very front part here, you can add a pin real quick until you start sewing. And then you're going to take those two notches, line them up, and you kind of have to manhandle your fabric a little bit so that it stays in alignment, so to speak. But see, those two notches are perfectly aligned. Now the second one is for this center seam here. So I take that notch and I line it right over the top. I'm making sure the top sides are good, and then I go ahead and pin, and then I do the same thing for this last alignment, but you'll get the idea here. So as I take this off, you can see now things are kind of lining up and making sense as far as when you go sewing. So that when you now sew, it's not a straight line, but it looks so much easier to tackle than if you're looking at this angle and you just see all those curves. That's definitely more difficult. So take your time, pin only at the alignment marks, and then let me get to sewing, and I'll show you how easy it is to put it together. So I wanted to show you real close with a camera that can zoom in on the other side to show you the actual sewing. So I've gone ahead just like before, and I've added the pins on the alignment marks. And let me go ahead and drop this into place. Now it always seems like starting and stopping the clamshell is the most difficult. But once you get it, you kind of get a flow to it and everything just kind of goes as planned. So once again, you'll see that I have those two pieces, and you can see that they're not quite aligned under here because of the way that the curves work. So I line those up nice and close, and then I pull to the side and simply sew and slightly turn. Stop once again, checking for alignment. I like to put my finger in to make sure that I can see both pieces perfectly. Pull to the back, kind of smooth everything out of the way, and then go ahead and continue to sew. Now, when I get to that first alignment notches, you're going to see that I already have a lot of bulk and kind of weird stuff underneath. So if you want, you can lift your presser foot and kind of smooth things out, and that'll make it a little bit easier for you. So I'm going to go a little bit further. I'm now to my pin. I'm going to pull my pin out, but keeping my finger there, I'm going to take underneath, make sure that everything's in alignment. So again, once again, looking, taking that back, making sure you pull that. To me, that's most important, because if you get a bunch of pleats and stuff in the back area here, it's so easy not to see them or feel them on top. So take your time, make sure that you manage the fabric in the back as well as in the front. Now I'm already to the very center part. I'm going to go ahead and remove that pin, keeping it firm there, and I'm going to pull the other fabrics and kind of align them. So I'm like so, and once again so. And I'll continue to do this the same that I've done, making sure that everything is aligned, pulling the fabric in the back so it doesn't create those puckers and pleats, and if I need to, lifting my presser foot, realigning things, dropping it, and continuing to go. It's that simple. It's not a difficult thing. I often have said that quilting different blocks, even if they're difficult, it isn't impossible. It's learning the techniques that make it go smoothly. And this is just another one of those things where you learn how to do it. Now, one of the things that you want to make sure of is you keep your needle down before you lift your presser foot, because we want to keep everything nice and aligned. I'm going to lift it again. Now I'm almost to the end here, and this is one of those areas where it just gets a little funky because the two pieces of fabric naturally are cut in a different direction, so they want to kind of not behave here. And then I have a pin at the end. I'm going to pull that out, line up the ends real quick, and this is the breeze. Ender, cut. And just like that, I've got another one of the clamshells added. So there's two that I've added. I'm going to continue this until I get them done. But it's that easy. Anyone can do it. So what a day it's been. It's been so much fun. we learned how to use an AccuQuilt cutting system, as well as all about the 8-inch clamshell that we used, and also how to make the quilt and back of me, and then the varieties of different layouts that you can do with that clamshell. There really is so much. I am so busy here. I started, the baby quilt to show you. And look at this. I've got so many more to work on. So I'm going to be busy here for a while. I hope you enjoyed this week's More Sewing with Michele as much as I did. And I look forward to seeing you next week on the next episode of More Sewing with Michele next Monday, 10 o'clock. And until then, I hope everyone is safe. Have a fabulous week. Get some sewing in, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.